Okay.
Hi, Chip. How are you this morning?
I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. Little early for me to start one of these this morning, but it was nice getting up, getting to see the sunrise, a little bit of fog, dew, whatever you want to call it, hanging over the grass. It's probably about the only moisture I'm going to see for the next 30 days, and about the only moisture I have seen for the last 30 days. So, are you getting any rain over there?
Fantastic. Raining here. It's rained for about a day and a half. My neighbors really needed it. We've had pretty good consistent rain once or twice a week here in our little corner of southeastern Indiana, but literally the people that I buy hay from have been struggling. So we've just had this little rain cloud over us. It's going right now because I have old granny cows that are about to calve, and I was out checking them this morning, and they want to go and hang out in the mud instead of go somewhere nice and dry to have a calf. And so check them this morning, have my coffee poured. Things are going pretty good. I'm on a podcast. I feel like I'm a pretty big deal being on the Ranch and Reboot podcast. And it puts me in the same, I'm now in the same class as Fred Provenza, and Steve Stratford. I feel like I'm on the same level as them when it comes to cow knowledge, right?
I don't know what that says about me because I don't know anything anymore. I don't know any more than I did when I started doing this.
Yeah, I can sum up my cattle. My ranching is what the hell do you mean just happened? How the hell did that just happen? That's our slogan around here. Like, what the hell do you mean just broke? So yeah, that's how we do it.
So you said you were in Southeast Indiana?
Southeastern Indiana. Yep. I'm on the very, very suburbs of Cincinnati.
Okay.
Very, very, very as out as you can go.
So if you're there by Cincinnati, Louisville is just a stone's throw across the river.
Yep. And okay. then I'm not equidistant between Indy and Cincinnati, but pretty close.
So why Southeast Indiana?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons. There's a big sociological reason that my family has followed the cattle business with the pioneers out to the Dakotas, from the east out of the Dakotas, and we've been sloshing back east. And there's that, I could give you that big spiel how this is a byproduct of the cattle industry in the United States, is a cowboy's kid living in southeastern Indiana. But the reality of the matter is I met a really hot chick, and she's from southeastern Indiana. And here I am. So yeah, my mom called me up one time. She said, "Hey, there's this girl I'd really like you to meet. She's pretty, and she's a cowgirl." And I was cowboying out with her in Colorado. And she said, and she's a writer, and she's a published writer, and she just like, you guys would just get along great. And I said, "Cowgirl from Colorado. I bet she looks like a female John Elway." And she's like, "Look her up on Facebook or whatever you're on now." So I did, and she didn't look anything like John Elway. So here I am, southeastern Indiana.
Okay. So I take it there's a roundabout story on how you got there?
There is. Came out of the military in 2016.
What branch?
Came out of the Army.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was Navy.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to. I know.
I won't hold that against you. So what did you do in the Army?
I didn't sleep in metal boxes with other men repeatedly. But Brian was in the Navy, and they're gross in the Navy. If anybody's listening, they don't understand that joke. But so came out of the military, and I've always had an eye on ranching. I was going to be a rancher right up until September 11th. September 11th happened with the military. Thought I was going to be there for 3 years, come home, chase a homecoming queen around, have a ticker tape parade, and lo and behold, the global war on terrorism, my part of it lasted for better than 15 years. I got my last group of guys back from Afghanistan. I called my sergeant major up. I was playing pretend first sergeant at the time. I called my sergeant major up and said, "Hey, I'm out of here." And he didn't let me go for another year. So the whole time that I was in the military, I had, older family members passing away and transitioning ranches and lease property. And I knew that the likelihood of going back to ranch country and being able to compete with other people to lease land and buy land was pretty unlikely. There's just too much competition. So I set my sights for central Minnesota, Have some family around there, and I'm kind of sort of, and set my sights out there. Kind of started getting myself set up ranching. Met Liz the same year I got out of the military. Spent 2 years building the business that could support a ranch, and moved east to chase, because the competition for land in central Minnesota, lease land and that kind of thing, is still high enough where it can be cost prohibitive to get into a lot of the stuff. Get back here to Indiana, and there's very little cattle industry. Land to lease is pretty available, so it's just not as competitive an environment.
I would imagine there's a lot of little parcels there where you're at in Indiana that aren't quite worthwhile to drag a 600 horse John Deere across, or just aren't going to raise a good, just aren't big enough to farm anymore. Is that kind of the case?
Well, the economics of farming around here is there's a lot of farmers trying to get going, and there's a guy that's farming hillsides right by us. Half of his fertilizer is going down the creek, and he's farming with a 1086 because he's trying to get going, and he's on land that I think would be pretty hard to make money on. So everybody's desire to go fence row to fence row, the old Earl Butts thing, it certainly applies in Indiana. But what they don't have is they don't have the labor that's required to go and clear fence lines, build fence, or deal with cows. People around here, because calves will be 600 weight calves will be back 20-30 cents from where good cattle markets are.
Really?
They'll be. So if you look at that, it is pretty stinking hard to make a living in cattle. So a lot of people own cattle as a hobby, and then when their hobby starts costing too much money, or their health cannot support that hobby, then they'll get out. And if I play my cards right and have my ear to the ground, I can rent that land before the fences are all grown up and that kind of thing. So, and another big part of this, another really big part of this, is I live between 3 cities that have a population of 1 million plus, and I'm in the grass-fed beef business. So
that's a small advantage.
Yeah. So that's a being in the grass-fed beef business in southern North Dakota, where the rest of my family is. Guess what? Everybody's in the grass-fed beef business, and everybody gets a quarter of beef every Christmas. That's a currency for relationships. Is something that was hanging from the front end loader. So this is a very deliberate move on my and Liz's part to be in the cow business out here, the cattle business.
I still interested. Well, I mean, we could kind of dive into some of the socioeconomics of ranching and why that pushed you back to the east. And I agree with what you're saying. And so you got out of the Army, what did you say, 15?
16.
In 16? So I got out of the Navy in 06. So
okay.
The costs in 2006, the land cost, still were fairly reasonable. I'd say a lot more reasonable than they were 10 years later. Around here, there was a round of oil exploration and leasing between 2010 and 2014 that really drove a lot of land price up, but things were pretty good until about then. And my dad's always talked to me about the cost of production and about, cows can't buy the ranch. Cows can't buy the ranch. I've been hearing that forever. And, the economics of it just simply don't work. I mean, and the economics of buying land with cattle hasn't worked in my area probably since, gosh, I'd probably say since the 80s, because there was a piece of ground, there's a piece of ground that adjoins me that's for sale right now. That, of course I looked at the listing and the price and I laughed at it, because I know that in 1983, 1984, somewhere along there, my dad and my grandmother passed up buying that property for $35 an acre.
Yep.
And now it's over $1,000 an acre, well over $1,000 an acre.
Right.
And
well, land is a vehicle to speculate on. and to stash some capital in, yeah, it might be fantastic because they're not going to make any more of it. But
I can't disagree on that point that land is a great quote investment. It's a place to put money to let it grow. But what happens to the people that are using that land as a means of production to produce protein for the world? Our costs keep going up due to no fault of our own.
absolutely, and then what happens is the small towns and the cultural fabric is hollowed out or rend apart, and then all of a sudden we have a society of people that are so removed from the agriculture production or animal husbandry or all these things that we've had for thousands of years. You know, the Alexander family and the McGregor family, you know, we were selected, you know, we were genetically selected to get along with livestock for hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay. And now all of a sudden we've had this livestock taken away from us. You know, let's say everybody except you and I are the 2% that still own moo cows. You know, so
let's just say that I feel like a large majority of people with neurodiverse minds need to get the hell out of the city and go be with livestock.
Right, and it's pretty simply, you know, having a farm as a tax write-off is and I'm currently sitting on a farm that started out as a tax write-off, and there's no way you could run cattle on you could not buy land and run cattle on it here in southeastern Indiana. You know, hillsides are going for well over $10,000 an acre. But you know, that's, you know, the person that's going to buy that place next to you is probably going to do it for a tax write-off or so they could have an estate or some other kind of thing like that. And then that's going to be one less family that's going to be part of that fabric. And that family that's part of that would be part of that fabric in your town would move to town. They would become farther removed from animal husbandry, from animal companionship, or I think that it's companionship is sharing of bread. That's the etymology of the word companionship.
Okay.
So when you have a companion animal, you're sharing in, when we say companion animal, the word companion is we're sharing in nutrition. So okay. So the Alexander, you know, the Corrientes on the Alexander place, you guys are all in it together. So, you know, and when you remove somebody from that, there's a significant amount of studies that have taken place over the years that I'm pretty familiar with, because my time running a company in the Army, you know, when we were having, everyone always hears about the 22 veteran suicides a day. Okay. That's something that we focused a lot, you know, right about 2014. That was a big focus of the non-commissioned officer corps in all of the military. And, you know, guys like me, we were sitting in front of the, we were sitting in front of the grade or regimental commander's desk on Monday morning talking about this stuff every stinking Monday. So I got pretty sharp on it, came out of the military and started writing about it and doing some research on it. And there's very few studies that lay it out, but there is a really good association between being around farming, being around livestock, having better mental health outcomes.
I can believe that 100%.
And then the converse, if you want the perfect recipe to go and drive yourself absolutely nuts and go, you know, have your brain stop working in the manner that it was supposed to, go become a vegan. That's if you're really interested in turning yourself crazy, stop eating meat and go start looking at animals as, you know, everything is a puppy dog.
Okay, I get that, and you're not going to convince me to quit eating meat, that veganism is the right way. And I know that's not what you're all about. So why do you say that?
Well, I'm saying that veganism is a way to drive yourself nuts. So that's, you know, we're coming at the angle of, you need to have livestock around you. We know that it helps people with mental illness. And we know that removing yourself from a relationship with livestock, which as far as I'm concerned is what veganism is. Okay. So we're looking at, we don't see them as Corriente cows. We see them as puppy dogs that are in a pasture. Okay. We have that same So all animals are all this. We need to have that amount of empathy with animals and stop having a relationship with them in nutrition, a nutritional relationship, and your outcomes as a vegan. So a vegan goes against livestock, is removed from livestock, and they have very, very bad mental health outcomes.
Does any argument for being a vegan make any sort of sense to you at all on any level?
Yes. Every one of them have 10%. 10% of every vegan argument is absolutely nuts on, 100% correct. There's a shred in every little bit of it. Absolutely.
What are some of those that stick out to you that you've heard?
Well, let's talk about. Well, I mean, let's go to where the rubber really meets the road. You know, animal processing, kill plants. Okay. Process. So everything. So a steer comes off the Alexander place, goes to a feedlot. Okay. Every step of that way, once he steps off of your trailer. Okay. So let's say he gets on a cattle pot on the Alexander place, goes to a feedlot. Every one of them processes that takes place once that animal steps off of your trailer could be a part of a documentary on why to be a vegan. They put it in the feedlot, pump it full of antibiotics, pump it full of all kinds of stuff, go and put it in a confined space, you know, feed it multiple times a day to stand up and go to feed, you know, and take it to when it's close to finish, that animal's going to be so close to unhealthy that, you know, if you have a minor weather event, it might kill a good portion of them off. Then it gets on a cattle pot in the heat, you know, gets hauled, you know, right now coming out of Kansas, you know, your cattle might end up in Green Bay. You know,
who knows?
They might, according to something with some coriander in it, might end up in Green Bay. And then once it gets to Green Bay, you know, that whole process, we have all this stuff that, you know, we've tried to make all these processes where they're visible, like in the kill plants and where the money's at. We've tried to make them better, but in reality, 100 years ago, your critter might have gotten on a train and gone to Omaha, or I don't know where you guys sent your cattle. But well, I guess you're close enough to Dodge.
I don't know where we sent them either. I wasn't.
But on the McGregor place, they got on a train and they went to South St. Paul. So from North Dakota to South St. Paul, they had. I don't think they had a stop for water between North Dakota and Minnesota. They got off there. They got kind of recovered. They got kind of sorted out. Then many of them went off to some little corn farmer where they got finished. And then they went to a local butcher shop. They probably went to that local butcher shop on their side. So they were probably going, you know, they're going to go looking forward to a grain bucket, and they caught something between the eyes. So the process that we had 100 years ago was absolutely more humane. So if we're the way that the steers that I grew up eating, they were going out and hey, it was time to get fed. All the family was over. It was time to get fed. Mom went and said goodbye to them. Maybe the little kids went and said goodbye to them. Dad walked out there with a grain bucket. When they stuck their head in the grain bucket, you know, they caught lead poisoning. So that, you know, so their last act was, oh, finally grain, you know, so
not being stressed out, walking up into a ramp, into a noisy place that they've never been before, being stressed out.
So that, and why do we have this whole process? Well, we have it for, there's a lot of financial reasons that I think are basically subsidies, but the USDA drives a lot of this. If I wanted to, so I have people come up to me all the time at farmers markets and say, I just want to not feel bad about eating meat. And I have a process to bring the stress out of my steers before they go to processing. And I explain it to these folks. But I remind them, you know, the USDA is in the way for me doing this at my place and having the least stress. I mean, there's nothing happier in the world than an animal that's about to stick his nose in a feed bucket.
Yeah, pretty much.
So that's, you know, hey, that's their last act on earth can be heaven on earth, you know, but I can't do that. That is illegal. And I think that consumers should have a vote in that. I would be very concerned about some of the people that, you know, how that could go. We have protections in the industry for a reason, but those protections that we've had have been degraded considerably.
I would agree that most of the protections that we've had that were put in place in the aftermath of Upton Sinclair's book, what was it, Into the Jungle?
Yep, the jungle.
The Jungle, his book exposing, the abuses of the meat packers over 100 years ago. And what's interesting to note is when they originally wrote Packers and Stockyards, there were 5 meat packers that had 60% control over the meat market, and now we've got 4 approaching 80 to 85% control. But that's not a problem according to Packers and Stockyards Act. And I get that that's a whole other can of worms to open up, is current situation. But how we got here, that's always an interesting story of how we got here, with the wave of consolidations in the 80s and through the 90s. And
Yep.
I'm kind of thinking about I'm thinking about the hog industry, because I just finished listening to a book Mike Calicrate recommended called Wastelands. It's about hog farming and the hog lawsuits just a couple of years ago down in eastern North Carolina, where they were spraying the basis of the lawsuits was it was a nuisance claim because some of the neighbors of the hog farms were getting overspray when they're spraying hog manure on the fields. They're getting it on their houses, on their, clotheslines, on the porch, whatever. That's, okay, when you say it like that, it's not that big a deal. Well, I think we both have a good understanding of what hog odor is, especially from, a 5,000 head hog barn, or 4 or 5,000 head hog barns that have a common lagoon, how bad that can smell. And I'm not quite finished with the book yet. I've got a couple of chapters yet. And it kind of tracks along with how I've always run the ranch. Okay, I can do whatever I want on my property, but I can't affect my neighbors. Yeah, I could build a dam on the creek right literally on my fence line. Am I within my rights to do that? Yeah. Would I probably have to go get a permit for NRCS because government regulations? Yeah. But technically, I could build a pond on the creek on the fence line, build a dam as tall as I want, and stop all that water from going to my neighbor. Is that the right thing to do? No, that's absolutely not right. And we lose sight of these decisions about what we should do to our neighbor or what we can legally do to our neighbor. And when we lose a sense of community, you don't care about your neighbor because you don't know them. They're just a nameless, faceless corporation of an absentee landowner that lives halfway across the continent. Why should I care about that guy? So,
Well,
go ahead.
if the Alexander Corporation had enough money, they could absolutely have no problem whatsoever doing exactly what you wanted to do. They could throw enough lawyers at your little counties, at your county and your state, where they could absolutely get away with whatever you wanted to do. So that sense of community, we've replaced the merit of community with a meritocracy of money, which is what we have. So,
And money is kind of the evil part of the system. And there's problems with our money, and we don't have to get into that. But
I guess let me rephrase my point. Bill Gates can get away with things that the Alexanders can't get away with.
Yeah, because he has lawyers to hide behind. He's got,
Yep.
A corporate, he's got LLC over here. He's got this business over here. He's got this S Corp and this S Corp. It's like Smithfield Foods and, Murphy Brown LLC and their different little entities that they've got. It's all just a shell game and a corporate veil to hide liability. Well, why can't we take advantage of that? There's nothing saying we can't take advantage of that. The only problem is we don't have the time to figure it out. Nobody's going to pull us aside to tell us. And all that shit's expensive to get set up because you got to pay the people to file the paperwork. We don't have that kind of time. So, us as people, small business owners, we're exposed to a lot more potential liability because we can't afford to set up a complex corporate structure.
Yep. Very true. And there's, in most industries, there's, you get big enough and you can self-insure. You just have enough assets where where you can self-insure. Well, I gotta cut a check to an insurance guy. He's a wonderful person. But he needs his check every month for me to continue to have
Yeah, and your insurance
my kids.
cost goes down every year, right? Because you don't make claims and you're a good upstanding citizen. That premium goes down every year, right?
Yeah, no, we find actually what happens is we find new and different types of insurance that we have to buy every single year because and it gets to the point where I think that's the only people that are making a living oftentimes. You know, we have all this liability insurance, every type of insurance in the world, and the insurance companies are doing really well. And yeah, there's a lot about insurance, but that's yeah, the small guy is most certainly more exposed than the big guy, and that's our own doing. That's absolutely our own doing. You know, in the last we're gonna. I don't want to talk about regenerative agriculture. Let's talk about something that's much less controversial, like politics.
Okay.
Or religion. If you want to do religion, we can do that. But I know if we talk
We'll
regenerative
stay away from religion. We can get into politics today.
if we talk regenerative agriculture, everybody will be mad and sending you hate mail and stuff like that.
All right.
So let's just stick with politics.
Programmed a good spam filter for that.
Yeah, let's just stick with politics. But in Minnesota, so in the last election, they had the Democratic Party is called the Democratic Farm and Labor Party. Okay, and what it was is a socialist party that came out of the Dakotas and filtered into Minnesota. Literally started in the Dakotas, came into Minnesota, bumped up against all the guys that worked on the docks in Duluth and the Mississippi River, and that was the Democratic Farm and Labor Party, and they're just as stinking socialist as possibly could be. Reason being is these guys in the 1800s, they knew that they needed to be together. You know, their individual communities needed to be together. That's, you know, Cenex Cooperative, all these cooperatives that are now big nameless faceless corporations. They started out as some farmers, you know, coming together to get some buying power or get some, you know, lobbying power, get something done in the, you know, in the halls of power. And now those cooperatives, now the Democratic Farm and Labor Party, it's still called that in Minnesota. It has very, very little to do with farmers whatsoever. The last congressman that was the last Minnesota congressman that was a big, hey, I'm going to get the pork. I'm the pork delivery guy. You know, he was a DFL. He was a Democrat, and just because he was Democrat, he got kicked out of office. He got beat very soundly by just kind of one of these, you know, this really rural Trump congressperson that, you know, just came in with a bunch of conspiracy theories and things like that. Really didn't have anything to say. And the whole time he's saying, hey, listen, the reason that we have all this good stuff in this farming, in this major farming in the Red River Valley on the eastern side, the reason we have this stuff is because I went and got it. Do not forget that. And so, you know, the socialists have been replaced in rural America because our population has been, and I'm not saying socialism is a good thing, but that was a form of collective action where a group of people could compete with the Bill Gates of the world. That was their solution 100 years ago. I'm most definitely not a socialist.
I'm not a socialist either, but I guess we could say this: there's a few good ideas in socialism. They're just taken way too far.
Yeah. No, I'm a humongous fan of socialism, but it inevitably comes down to, hey, well, we got to go shoot these guys that don't get along with us, and you know, which everybody has. But socialists, they've made it, they've turned it into an art form of getting rid of people that don't agree with them. So,
well, that's 90% of what government does, is getting enough people to agree to go shoot the people that don't agree.
Yep. And what did you do in the Navy?
I was an engineer, sir. I was not a trigger man. I just made the boat go. Just
okay.
Other people pointed it. I just made sure it could go A to B at the right speed. So I was all pumps, pipes, valves, anchor windlass, steering gear, main propulsion, fuel pumps. Okay. My first enlistment, I was on the USS Enterprise.
Okay.
And, that was interesting because we literally owned gear all the way from one end to the other end, all the way from the bottom to the top. So we had the anchor windlass all the way up in the forecastle. We had the aft steering gear all the way at the back of the boat. We had winches on both sides, like for underway replenishment. We had the boat davits. We had this stupid crane called the boat it was, we called it the B&A crane. And it was a terrible piece of machinery. The other cool things we had the aircraft elevators, which the machinery for those is kind of cool. Doing the maintenance on them underneath the flight deck, that's another story for another time. But we also had, my shop was responsible for an elevator that went from the hangar bay level all the way to the top of the island. Now, it was the captain's elevator. And somehow I got into a position where I was the guy doing maintenance on the captain's elevator, and I got my own personal key for the captain's elevator. So whenever I wanted to go up to the top of Vulture's Row, up at the top of the island to watch them do flight ops, especially at night, I didn't have to walk up 13 flights of stairs to get there. I could take the elevator.
Nice. Very nice. Hey, that congressman I was talking about, if anybody wants to look it up, is Colin Peterson, and he was over in the Minnesota Red River Valley, big farm area, and I don't have his Wikipedia page up or anything like that. He was beat in 2017. He was replaced by Michelle Fischbach, who her whole campaign was like, I support Trump and he supports me, and the Colin Peterson, the pork delivery guy, he was taken out. So I think that says something about our politics and about I don't know about the little guy, but it started out they were on the side of the little guy. That's where they got their votes. So
do you think we have anybody in government that actually understands agriculture? I mean, that understands not just what the lobbyist and industry organizations tell them that, well, we've got this much production from this ground, but actually understand agriculture down to a fundamental soil level.
So Joni Ernst in Iowa, senator from Iowa, she kind of comes vetted by me. She's married to an Army Ranger, and we know people in common. And so when she when she ran for office, she came out fire and brimstone, and she came in with the Tea Party, so I kind of called her. I was like, hey, do you guys know this guy? Like, oh yeah, he's a hell of a good guy. And they're actual farmers in Iowa, all that kind of stuff. And I think the minute that you become a senator, I think when you step off the farm, you just get inundated with all of these people that have some political agenda that they really need. I think the noise, the static goes up to 1 million. And then, the Chip McGregors and Brian Alexanders of the world, they really stop mattering when it comes right down to it, because I don't have time to go and make a bunch of noise. I got old granny cows in her cabin, and my next contribution to a campaign is going to be a campaign for getting another one of these stand-up freezers put in behind me. So yeah, it's just
isn't that their plan? Keep us busy. Isn't that their plan? Keep us busy enough. Like, if you keep the tax slaves busy enough, they won't revolt. They won't have time to look up.
But I don't. So here, I have an issue with you're the first time I've heard you say it, but you're going to get the full brunt of my frustration with the term. Who is they? You said that isn't it their plan. Who is they?
I get what you're saying, and I'm not one of those people that think that there is a vast global conspiracy of lizard people that are ruining the world. I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy theorist because I can see what's going on in the world and say, hey, these stimmies are going to cause inflation. No, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist. Okay, whatever. I get that. Is there's not a shadowy cabal. There's not a dark smoke-filled room full of people that are running shit. When I say they, I'm just kind of overall referring to the people that are in charge, and not anybody in specific or a specific body that is like colluding to bring about a certain future. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. So now what was I saying for that?
So you're talking about we were talking about a senator goes and they get so much noise coming from all these different aspects of the ag world that they probably didn't know existed, or, didn't realize that there was, they had that much voice, and they forget about the McGregors and the Alexander family.
Some of it, managing at scale is hard. It's very hard. We're both good managers in our own right, on our own little postage stamp of dirt with our own little handfuls of cows. And no matter how big or important we both think we are, in the grand scheme of life, in the grand scheme of that, how much land area is in the United States, the size of the United States cow herd, neither one of us are anything. Like,
Yeah,
we're not even an ingrown hair on a gnat's ass.
Yep.
For as important as we think we are. You get elected to even to state government. Okay. Right here, sitting in my studio, I have a fairly compact circle of concern. Things that I can affect, things that I need to be concerned about. I have a very compact circle of influence, things that I can change. When you get into government, that scope has to broaden out a lot. I mean, a huge margin. So the attention that I have and the attention that I can give my postage stamp, if I had to go to Congress, even the state Congress, I don't get more attention. I don't get more mental bandwidth, right? We don't get any more of that. You wake up in the morning, you've got X amount of mental energy that you're going to spend through the day. Okay. I choose to spend it on my grass and cows. So I can put a lot of energy into a very compact situation. When you're managing at scale, you have the same mental energy budget to apply to a much larger area of problems. And they don't have mental energy to apply to it. They got to have aides that have to, that tell them facts. Human mind is faulty. We've all played the telephone game, where you get 50 people in a line, and at one end you say Johnny called Susie, and by the time you get to the other end, it's Frank and Bob went on a date. Okay.
Yep.
These messages get messed up and lost and confused in translation. So you'll have, I guess I don't know what I kind of losing my point here. But it's hard to manage. It's a fantastically hard challenge to manage at scale. And we've never done it. I never have. I mean,
and I think that it's especially hard for somebody that is a farmer and they've been, like, hey, they're a damn expert at putting, quarter corral panels together. And maybe someone is better served to having, your senator would probably be more effective if his background was he was the captain of the enterprise and was able to delegate and manage different systems. That would make him a better senator than some, dumb farmer that's been, trying to make irrigation work or keep stock decks full. You're not set up for it. To go and manage a staff, have a chief of staff, have 5 D-level people that are managing major projects for you, and you check in with them 3 times a week. So
sometimes I kind of have a hard time really thinking about how a large top-down management structure should work, because I don't think they do. I think that's kind of almost a waste of mental energy from time to time, because top-down structures that are managed from the top down, they always fail. And what works and what's worked throughout history are small communities that are managed either from the bottom up or collectively for that, for the future of that group. And they share a collective vision of how to manage the resources and how they're going to manage the resources in the future. And once your community gets past a certain size, that bottom up management doesn't work anymore. And that kind of coincides with the breakdown of social fabric. Once your community passes about 200 people, I think those social connections start to break down, because a human can only maintain about 150 social connections. That's what I've read. Some people are less. I'm probably like way on the bottom end of that scale. Some people are really outgoing and they're way more. Fine. I'm not that guy. But it's being able to maintain the social connections and take care of one another and know what the other people in your community need versus what you think they need. I mean, community gets big enough, you don't have time to listen. You don't know everybody. And you start making assumptions. You start telling yourself stories. And I think the important part is that the most important part in that whole spiel is probably what's most often overlooked. It's the community needs to have a common vision on how to manage their shared resources. So what's that look like? Like, is that 80% of people agreeing on 80% of the stuff, or is that a simple majority? And I think instead of thinking about things in terms of, well, left and right, Democrat, Republican, 50-50, winner and loser, I think we need to be thinking about trying to build more of like an 80% consistent, 80% consistence. Like get 80% of the people to agree with 80% of what you say. And I think you might have something.
Yeah, and that's in keeping with a lot of different things. Let's circle back to, we were talking about veganism and all that kind of stuff. And, we brought up The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And the book, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, is not about the hogs on the large wheel being dismembered in this factory. It is about Jurgas moving these, I think the Lithuanian, it's a story of this family that moves to the United States. They're taken advantage of. It opens at a wedding where Jurga, I think his name is Jurga. It's been a little bit since I've read it. So it's actually about the rending apart of a culture or of a family. And they come out of their culture into the culture of Chicago, and they all kinds of stuff. They get sold a bill of goods on a house. They all go broke, and then some of them kind of get their, they go through all this trouble. They get their crap together, and then that's kind of the story of America. But what Upton Sinclair was writing about is how we are taking advantage of, how we are treating these people like animals. That was the problem, and he had to use the
exploited immigrant labor.
Yep, exploited immigrant labor. And he even said in interviews after the fact, he said it wasn't about the stinking conditions in the slaughter plants. It was how we're treating the immigrant labor, which, we've just replaced I think they're Lithuanians. We've replaced them with migratory workers. That is one of the stories of America. So that community is that culture, that Lithuanian culture that they brought with them, that they're dancing in this wedding in the beginning of the book. That's just it being rent apart. And what's happening now to your community and to the community of the North, the community that the McGregors are from in North Dakota, is it's being rent apart. And everybody thinks that, well, we're still here, we're doing bigger and better than ever, and it's not going to happen to us. And in reality, you can look through the history of the United States, and Grapes of Wrath, Hemingway and Steinbeck are all talking about people that are being displaced.
And those aren't new stories.
No, and it's happening, and people are like, well, that'll never happen to me. There's no way that'll ever happen to me. And at the same time, the big tractor manufacturers come out, look at this thing we can do. We don't need a farmer anymore, and look at this spray right here. Like we can do all this without, some jerk that can't read good and it's hard to get along with. My dad said they never should have made a tractor larger than the 40-20. That would have saved most of rural America.
I mean, you could even say a 9N Ford or a Farmall M should have been the biggest tractor.
I think old men. I think they said nothing bigger than the little gray Fords. I think I've heard that same kind of thing. But and now is that
the other 6 commodity farmers that listen just went click and turned us off.
The last, we just killed off the last of that part of your audience. But the reality of the matter is if we said, guess what? Here's our limit on tractor size. Then I don't know.
Never driven by an Amish community?
That makes socialism look pretty dang good. That's the kind of thing that, like, ooh, well, hold on now. you know, so.
You ever go by an
But,
Amish community and check out their machinery?
my dad used to sell lots and lots of horses to the Amish, and yeah, that's. But we take a look at, so that's a religious thing. We're predominantly talking about culture when we're talking about ranching.
But you can't talk about culture without talking about religion, because when you're talking about the Amish, their religion, I mean, their religion is intertwined with their culture.
Right.
And
Well, that's all. Also,
even you and I, okay, I don't want to talk about you. I'll talk about me. I'm not very religious, but there's a lot of Judeo-Christian philosophy and thinking that are intertwined, into my culture. That's who
yes.
I am. And we're talking about, we were just talking about the Upton Sinclair's book Into the Jungle, and you're absolutely right. It's not about the conditions in a meatpacking plant. They're described as horrible, but the story is really about the story of immigrant labor and how they're taking advantage of in these packing houses. And it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. And I was sitting here and I made a few notes that modern agriculture, like whether we're talking about the chicken industry, whether we're talking about pork, whether we're talking about commodity crops, or whether we're talking about the cattle industry that we've had for the last, well, let's just say 8 years, it's all based on exploited labor. It's based on exploited labor. It's based on externalized cost, and it's based on underpaid labor. And it's not possible without massive government subsidies. So
Yes.
now let's start to unpack some of that. Let's just focus on that labor side of it. Okay. So 100 years ago in the Chicago meat plants, it was a lot of Eastern Europeans that came over, Latvians, a lot of Polish too, I think. And now we moved all the packing plants out to Western Kansas, out to the Texas, Oklahoma panhandles.
Yep.
We moved them there because that's where we built the feedlots. Why did we build the feedlots there? Because it doesn't rain and there's a lot of water for irrigation.
Yep.
I mean, we can open that can of worms here in a little bit. So we moved the packing plants out to where nobody's living there. So how do we, well, let's get them staffed, bring up people from the South. And this isn't like a dig on any kind of an immigrant at all. This is just pointing out the obvious flaw in the system, that it doesn't work without exploited labor. Meat plants don't work without exploited labor that work below the cost. I mean, below the cost of what, an American citizen would generally work at. People want to come here for the opportunity and they want to work in those meat plants, but nobody here wants to do it because it's dirty work. It's a lot of blood. And, a packing plant would be the last place I'd want to work. If we're picking out jobs as a 16-year-old in school and they had all the jobs lined up, like they probably should have, meat plant worker wouldn't be one of them. But if there was a sheet that said artisan butcher right next to meat plant assembly line worker, I might read that description and say, oh, well, this guy stands on a line and makes one cut every day, makes one cut 600 times. This guy makes 600 different cuts on one carcass, and he turns, he extracts value from this thing that used to be living and is going to provide sustenance for people, and he extracts maximum value for that. But they didn't talk about meat cutters when we were kids, when we were going through school. That wasn't an option. Go to college. If you don't go to college, you won't have a degree. You won't know anything. Nobody will ever hire you, which has also led to an entire generation with useless college degrees that they can't pay for.
Right.
I guess that's another conversation entirely. So to kind of continue on this whole exploited labor conversation. So in the beef industry, our exploited labor's in the packing plants. Our exploited labor
Yep.
is the hobby farmer.
Yep.
Our exploited labor is the hobby farmer that's an insurance salesman in town that keeps 5 cows in their backyard and feeds hay all year and doesn't know his cost of production. If you're listening to this and you're offended by what I just said, I'm sorry, but the truth is the truth. If if you're taking your calves to the barn and you don't know how much money you've got in them, you're hurting the business for the rest of us. 100%. So it's people that are in this, that are raising livestock as a hobby, that we have to compete against, that those of us running a business have to compete against. So that's exploitation of labor. We take a look at, if you read the book, The Meat Racket by Christopher Leonard, it talks about the chicken industry, primarily focuses on the chicken industry. Tyson's Chicken Houses in Northwest Arkansas. You don't like, there aren't guys that look like you and me in there. Like, we're talking immigrant labor that works 20 hours a day to barely break even, on these horrible contracts, horrible terms, lenders, all the worst stuff. It's the same with hog farmers in North Carolina. How long is it going to be before we're replaced? I don't think we'll get replaced because cattle take up too much land. The packers don't need to chickenize the beef industry. We already did it for them.
Yeah, well, we have been replaced. We have been replaced in the feedlots. We absolutely have been replaced in the feedlots. The cattle feeder. I don't know how large a cattle feeder was in 1960, but I think that I would have to imagine that 500 head was a pretty stinking big operation. And I realize that we're still, since the 50s we've had big feedlots, but
I think it was like 1954, 55 when the first modern big feedlot was built down by Hereford, Texas.
And do you know why it was built? What the business decision was that drove that?
I probably could come up with something, but it would be bullshit and not the truth. So why don't you tell me what?
No, it was. So I will cite this if you need it for your show notes later. But it was put into place because it was one of the, I think it was first hormone treatment for cattle came about, and the money people, the bean counter said, hey, look at that, now this thing makes sense. And it was and that treatment, that hormone treatment was very quickly found to be very detrimental for human health. But yeah, it was driven by pharmaceuticals.
Some reason I'm sitting here thinking, okay, that I'm trying to put some puzzle pieces together and I'm not sure they quite fit well. So I might have to talk this out. So mid 50s, we built feedlots. We built the first big feedlots down around Hereford, Texas. And it didn't take more than probably just a few months before they started sprouting up like mushrooms after a spring rain. And the growth hormone, like an early growth hormone, I hadn't necessarily heard that. I remember when Ralgro came out in the 80s.
Yep.
And that was, I think I remember the cattlemen back in the 80s talking about this is so much better than that crap we used to use. This is so much better, so much better. Okay. So there's a puzzle piece. So through the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, we've discovered feedlots. We're starting to stuff cattle into these feedlots. And they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is before Temple Grandin did a lot of her work. So feedlots are getting bigger. Animal performance is probably starting to drop off, but it's being artificially held up by hormones and growth implants. So we go do that for 15 years and beef quality declines. The hormones we're using make it, tough and unpalatable, which leads to the quality perception problem that we had coming into the late 70s, which is why we needed the checkoff, right?
Yep.
That was the lie that we got sold on we got sold on the checkoff. Well, we need this to, increase quality, increase competition, blah, 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 blah. Well, and we don't have to talk about what's happened since the checkoff, but it just seems like, the scale, challenges of managing at scale, challenges of growing food at scale, challenges of growing anything at scale. Maybe scale is the problem. Maybe the
scale is a problem. Absolutely. Scale is absolutely. No two ways about it. And the way you're able to scale is to remove the human component from it. That's how you scale. Pretty simple.
And that gets back to, the whole labor argument. Like I'm having trouble squaring the labor and energy.
Let me give you the history of the McGregor family.
Okay.
And see if there's any clues in there. Okay. So my great grandmother wrote for the Corson County paper her life history sometime in the 1960s. And then that was tied together by my aunt, and I myself have spent a lot of time just talking to, we had a big rift go through the middle of our family. And when I turned 18 years old, I had the opportunity to go and get to know one of my uncles, and got all kinds of history. And my dad, he had his version of things, and his older brother obviously had a very different version of things, as brothers will do. And so my great grandmother left Pennsylvania, son of a Civil War veteran, ended up renting farms her dad rented farms in Iowa. They ended up with a place in central South Dakota at the time that the cattle drives were still coming through.
So 1850s, 1860s?
Yep.
70s, 80s, somewhere. Okay.
Went north to the North Dakota, South Dakota border, across from what is now Timber Lake. Went to Omaha visiting family, came back with a guy that had named McGregor, that had no past, but he had through his tack and through pictures, this guy had Texas cow punch traditions, and that was my great grandpa, William McGregor. And
but you don't know anything about him?
He was a murderous son of a gun. That's what we know about him. He would sell teams of horses to immigrants, and then once they got over the next major terrain feature, he'd go and get his horses back. He started a range war. There was a real honest to God range war. That they were shooting horses out underneath people. In that Corson County paper, she admitted to him lynching Indians. This son of a gun was not a nice guy by any means.
Not somebody you wanted to be on the bad side of.
Yep. So she started out in Pennsylvania and then died in North Dakota. Her son, my grandfather, he started out in North Dakota and he died in Minnesota. No one in our family in that whole history has lived in one state and ranched in one state that whole time. They went out south of Mandan on the South Dakota border. They went and built a big ranch, built a big, beautiful house, grew corn down there, which I think that's still amazing. They built a house out of sequestered carbon, and
okay, I'm not letting that one go by. How did they build a house out of sequestered carbon?
They built a sod house.
Okay.
And replace that with what is effectively a mansion, probably about a 3,500 square foot stick built house. And then everything just kind of went to shit right around World War I. And it was during the Great Depression that my grandfather and his brothers, they were driving cattle out of the Dust Bowl. They're going to go and graze along the Cannonball River. When great grandfather died, some of the brothers said, finally, I'm not going to get shot if I try and leave. They moved to upstate New York. My grandfather ranched around that area until he had some drought, different pressures were put on him. Then he moved to central Minnesota, basically, because land was really cheap. You could, if you could put a fence up, it was really cheap land. He dropped everything, went to Minnesota, and then that's where my dad started ranching. I was actually born in Minnesota. And now I'm in southeastern Indiana. Over that whole history, there's not been a single McGregor that has lived and died in the same state. We've migrated with the cattle business. Now that's only 5 generations because we're all old men when we have kids. We wait around till our 40s to have kids. So there's only 4 generations in that family. So that's how we're able to do that, not live in the same state. But if you look at that history, that's, there's a lot of opportunity. And when my great grandmother, when she went out to North Dakota, that was free labor. And that was a pretty ballsy move to go, the Sioux Indians were still, they were certainly not put down at that point. And so, you think about that, that is a tremendous amount of opportunity. And then my grandfather leaves that area for another opportunity because Minnesota was, it was one big swamp when he moved back to Minnesota. So, and I'm in Indiana chasing opportunity, but I'm chasing opportunity where the old fences, there's old fences where I'm building fence. I know where the property line is because there was a fence there, made with cedar posts 50 years ago.
Right.
And so I'm still chasing opportunity. I just hit the other end of the bathtub and now I'm sloshing back this way. But my grandmother, they shot their way out of their problems. My grandfather, I don't know if he ranched his way out of his problems. And then my dad, he went and got a good job in town after he came out of the Navy. And that's how he was able to finance his ranching operation.
Oh, your dad was a Navy man? Now you tell me.
He was. And he was a boiler operator too.
Oh, is a boiler tech?
Yeah.
That's the other side of the rating that I was in. I started off as a machinist mate, which just after I joined, or I guess just before I joined, they combined boiler technicians with machinist mates.
And I don't know how many Enterprise. I know it's not the World War II Enterprise, but I think that he put an Enterprise in service too.
Probably the World War II one. The one I was on didn't come in till I think 60. I should know this, like 61 or 62.
Yeah, he came out.
He was old when I was there.
He came out in 62. That's when he left the Navy. And I think one of the last things he did is put I think he put the Enterprise in service.
That would be pretty. That could be, and that might be kind of interesting if your dad was a plank owner on one of the boats I was on.
Yeah. So, but that was, and he came out as a boiler operator and went to work for the reason that Minnesota made sense. He went to work for a paper mill, and it was a good job. Union. It was a good union job that he didn't. He could work shift work, and finance all kinds of finance and ranching. And that's how that's a place that I was born on. So, and then the paper plant went to hell. Unions left, and then we ended up bouncing around the country. Predominantly, I think, until my dad got another good job. But we bounced all over building ethanol plants and cow kill plants and things like that, and trading horses. So, that's kind of and he blamed it on what he referred to as Reaganomics, but basically what it was globalism is what chased dad around the countryside.
That's, you can't really talk about Reaganomics in a lot of circles because St. Ronnie is still held in very high regard in a lot of red states. And I get that, but I think I'm with you on the bus that this whole globalization Reaganomics train is a wreck and has been a wreck. It's just taken us, 30 years to see it and see how bad it's going to be. I mean, over half our food supply is owned by foreign interests. Like, food security is national security. How did we forget that?
You almost had to you almost caused some editing there.
I do the editing, so I get to choose how much I want to do.
So but he dealt the death knell to globalism when we came out of Vietnam. We said, hey, guess what? These hippies don't want to go and fight all that bad. This is not World War II and Korea generation. These guys want a different way. They come out and he says, all right, we can outspend the commies. We ain't gonna go and fight it out in the jungle with them, but we can outspend them. So he sinks Russia, makes Russia unsustainable. And then his predecessor, not his predecessor, the guy that came after him, George H.W. Bush, he was the last globalist. He's the guy that said, what do you mean you want to go and attack Kuwait? Let's go and handle business. Bill Clinton came in and said, hey, we're going to fix all these domestic problems that we have right here. Like this is domestic problems. And then George W. came in. He's going to fix domestic problems. Obama's going to fix domestic problems. Everybody wants to fix domestic problems to the point where both Trump and Biden, they said, hey, we are not that worried about what's going on over the horizon. We're going to fix all these domestic problems. And that is the end of globalism. That is, which the whole cattle industry, the whole ag industry, everybody's like, we got to feed the world. We got to feed the world. Here's a question. When it came time to make sure that we had enough oil to go and feed the world, Did you go inside? Did you walk down to your local friendly strip mall and say, hey, and and there's four people with hangovers there, one in the Air Force, one in the Navy, one in the Marine Corps, one in the Army. Did you go and visit with those guys after 9/11? No, you did not. But you said, oh, I want to feed the world. Guess what part of feeding the world is keeping the shipping lanes open and keeping everybody with enough diesel fuel to drive around and go and eat our food. But on an individual local level, even in agricultural communities, so like there's some guys like, oh, I did. And like, yeah, absolutely. Now look around you. How many of your neighbors did? My dad went to the Korean War, and my dad was the second son. And his brother Jim did not go to the Korean War and married the prettiest girl in the county. And when he was almost 80 years old, I was at a wedding with my Uncle Jim, where this Korean War vet accused him of being a draft dodger and marrying the only pretty girl in the county, because everybody in that county up and left for the Korean War. Everybody. And Uncle Jim still got shit about it 50 years later.
I was sitting here thinking about how many guys I know around here that are veterans, and there's a few, just a few, and most of them are older than me.
And you're in Kansas.
Yeah. Surprisingly, there's a large amount of Navy guys, old Navy vets around. Like I'd say half the vets I know are Navy guys. Why? I don't know. 1,500 miles away from the ocean. Let's all sign up for the Navy.
That says something bad about your community, I think, as far as I'm concerned. But
I'll let that one go.
No, after 9/11, they said, hey, go buy a new Chevy at 0% interest. Go shopping. Go shopping. And then it was about 2005, it was June 30th, 2005. George W. Bush went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and he said, hey, we really need help. This is an honorable profession to be in the military, and we need help. And I've said this before, anybody who was in the military in 2007, 2008, how shorthanded were you? Everyone was shorthanded. So, I
bounced, man. I bounced in 2006 because the corporate culture was going downhill in a hurry.
Yep. And, but most people, they said what the message they heard was, hey, go shopping. Let's save this. Don't let this ruin our economy, instead of, so that's fine. This is not one of them places where I'm trying to make somebody feel guilty about not going. I'm trying to use that as an illustration of when people say, we got to feed the world.
Well, okay. Look, what is it? Over 70% of young people between 18 and 25 are medically disqualified from joining the military. Like right up front, it's just staggering that 70 to 80% are ineligible just walking in the freaking door.
And how did Dr. Fred Provenza, how did he explain that with epigenetics? He's using it right, used with cattle. I've just listened to the Fred Provenza episode.
Okay, it was several weeks ago for me.
Okay, on ranching reboot with Brian Alexander, with the Red Hills Rancher, I listened to Dr. Fred Provenza explain how what you eat, you become what you eat, basically.
Yeah.
And the day after I listened to it, there was a New York Times article came out and said that, hey, there are people, not a matter of getting them to sign up, they just can't pass a physical to get in the military. Which, if you've ever been in the military and sat in a chow hall in Iraq, I want you to know you don't need to be in very good condition to be in the military.
I mean, 1.5 miles sounds like a lot of running when you haven't run, but trust me, after doing it every day for 2 to 3 months in boot camp, that 1.5 miles is cake.
Yeah. So
50 push-ups, don't worry about it. Don't sweat that. I mean, unless you want to go be a Marine, then you got to do some pull-ups and stuff. But if you're really worried about the physical, just go to the Air Force.
Yeah, the Army's got a pretty. You can get in the Army and be okay. Yeah, it's not too difficult. So that's we are what we eat, and now we're feeding everybody a bunch of garbage, and especially
we got to feed the world.
Yeah, we got to feed the world, and especially we're feeding poor kids garbage, because rich kids are buying grass-fed steaks from me.
Yeah,
but the poor kids, they get the hot dogs and that kind of stuff. And guess who goes in the military? It's the poor kids, more often than not. But so yeah, that's we got a hell of a mess to unravel here.
So did you just say that regenerative agriculture is racist? Because only rich kids can afford to eat it?
You know what? We have some real problems in regenerative agriculture. Yeah, we really do. Um, and I don't, and you know, I don't know if I'm part of regenerative agriculture.
So we may have lost Chip. Try to edit this.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, there you are.
Okay.
I'll make it.
So where the last thing I heard, I was talking and I said that I don't know if I'm part of regenerative agriculture. I have a different bent that I might want to be on.
Let's talk about that. I mean,
I'm gonna float this with you first. This is it right here, vegan warrior. So I don't think that I think that we regenerate the land, and Liz, she is most definitely the regenerative agriculture, one of a handful of regenerative agriculture people in this area, and she's been at it since way before it was cool. And but and she has like water lines buried throughout. She puts up 2 stock tanks with every one of her pastures and all this. She has infrastructure. I'm different. I think that I am part of deindustrialized agriculture.
okay.
If it costs money, I don't want to do it. So my cows, the pastures that I set up and I take care of, my cows can walk the water. They have legs. I don't need to go and dig a trench to go and make this. Now, does this place that we're on, does it look absolutely fantastic? And is its carrying capacity unbelievable? Absolutely. But the reason I bring up deindustrialized agriculture and how I think that we should do business is regenerative agriculture is not that accessible. If you go and listen to everybody let's say listen to Brian Alexander and you say, I'm going to go and I'm going to get into regenerative agriculture. Look at so
I don't know if you should listen to that guy. He's full of crap.
Let's go check out Red Hills Rancher. He's going to have this really fantastic little stock tank that's got on a little trailer, and then he has this big chunk of water line and a solar pump and all these things to really go and get that place of his. Really do it upright, okay? And all these, and then all the social media folks that I follow, Trevor and Hobbs, and they all have these really nifty solutions to all these problems, and a lot of these solutions that they have are thousands of dollars for these solutions. So it's not accessible. Where in reality, you can go ranching. Now, I was raised by some awfully good men that were good and cheap, but I'm going ranching with a 3/4 ton pickup and a couple of small engines, that are on water pumps. And, like I can, I don't know how long it takes for me to wear out a generator and burn a cup full of gasoline every time I want to go and water my cows. But I think that overall, when you're, and everybody that's listening, Brian has this really nifty solar pump and this nifty little water tank trailer. It's really fantastic. And I don't know what the break-even point is for my little cup of gasoline in my generator and my sump pump is, over the course of the life of your thing. But that's what I'm saying. You don't need $1 million to go ranching. You need some cows. You need some fence. Some hay is really nice.
I'd argue the hay.
Well, yeah, I'd argue against hay, but you know what? It sure does feel good having 250 tons of hay in a pile right now.
Yeah.
That makes me fuzzy all over. I don't know. And but in deindustrialized agriculture, I can go and buy hay for a lot cheaper than I can put it up. I think that here in the suburbs, I can buy hay for cheaper than I can grow forage.
And that just blows my mind. That just absolutely boggles my mind is how somebody can grow hay and bale it cheaper than I can grow grass. That makes no sense to me.
I think it's a fallacy of sunken costs. And they say, well, if we want to go farming, we got to go and buy a baler. we got to go buy a tractor, we got to buy a baler, we got to buy a hay bind, we got to have all this stuff. And then they have it. They have a job in town. Their wife has a job in town. Everybody has a job in town. And then they start getting their math creative enough to where they think that they're actually making money. And in reality, they're just depreciating vehicles. Or depreciating machinery. But the deindustrialized agriculture, it's not just a matter of getting in it. There's always a way to do. If you don't have the money, there's always a way to go and do something. There's always a way to figure it out.
Raise the long pasture with some sheep.
Yep. So one of the things one of my dreams is to get set up in a way, and I think this would really go well with the prepper and urban homesteader type crowd that don't have room for cattle. I would love to have a group buy a critter from me and knock it in the head hanging from a front end loader and have them take it apart. That would be
on the farm.
Yeah, maybe on the, I don't know how badly I want to have people coming and going and all that kind of stuff. But, I bet you could get that, because that's how McGregor's have fed themselves since, we didn't eat our own cattle because our cattle, they had value and they went to town and they got sold. But you could go to town and you could find something. You could go to find something with a crooked front leg and eat him, So, and that's some pretty dang cheap eating. If you wanted to, the price of grass-fed steaks, if you want grass-fed meat, it's pretty stinking hard to buy a pound of grass-fed anything for under $10 a pound anywhere, except if you went out, if you went out to the Alexander place or you went out to the McGregor place, there's probably somebody that needs to go. I'm sitting in my freezer room, what we call the Second Chance Ranch.
Okay.
Because if you give us a dirty look or give one of the girls around here a dirty look, this is where you go. But there's times in the year where we don't have the processing dates and we're hanging on to cattle, where we'd love to sell you a quarter of beef if you came and cut it up yourself. So.
But we can't do that.
That makes it accessible. I don't know. I think if I sell a critter to 5 people and they show up and I provide the steel tables, and I'm a long ways from doing it. But I absolutely think that'd be a go. And I think that, and then if you had a butcher that knew what they were doing, that was walking them through it, and teaching, like some French butcher really teaching them how to do it, I think people would really be into it. I've watched a lot of meat cutting videos, like, hey, you can go to Costco and you can buy this shoulder claw and this is how you break it down. They have real, I think that's really neat. So not so neat that I want to do it for a living, but, I sure like watching people talk about it. So.
For sure. So, you pick on vegans an awful lot.
I do.
Any reason? Just easy targets?
Yeah. So I went, they are becoming easier targets. I've actually, as of late, I've been picking on industrialized agriculture a lot more than vegans because we have to, I'm just kind of setting the conditions for my argument. But when I was a corporal in the Army, they said, you got to have an email address and I had to start writing emails. I had to start populating different things and writing emails. And my platoon sergeant, Jeff Winstead, said, hey, I'm going to swear, so everybody hide your ears or whatever. I'm going to say it. Jeff Winstead said, hey, McGregor, you write like an asshole. You need to go to college. So I went to college because Jeff Winstead was one of the people you listen to. And so I signed up for a philosophy class. I'd studied a lot of religion and go to this philosophy class. And you get about 2 weeks into it and you start talking about sentient beings and the singer talking about animals having as many rights as human beings. And all of these arguments come up, and there's no farm kids sitting there in a philosophy class. So I was kind of me against the world, and I was at, I was stationed in Fort Lewis, so a very, very liberal population outside of Fort Lewis. And
Where's Fort Lewis? I don't know.
Washington.
Okay.
Come Washington. So I'm in this community college arguing like, hey, that's not really how it is. That's not like, this animal feels this animal feels, this animal feels. And,
You're like,
I would
no.
use horses. I would use horses because I grew up eating horse. I'm from Plains people, and my dad liked to eat horse, and we had horse in the freezer. Oh, that's just how it was. So they're like, I can't believe that you would eat a horse. And when you say, listen, that horse is not a puppy dog. Okay. Like, I don't care if you eat horse, but all through Europe, they are eating horse. And if you think that having a horse in your backyard, in your 1 acre backyard, and hucking him half a bale of hay every day, that is the worst torture you could possibly give a horse, because that horse is designed to move 30 to 50 miles a day to go and find water and new ground.
With friends.
So if you own a horse, you need to be on that damn thing a good portion of the day and keep its mind working, because just up until very recently, that animal has been designed to work. And that has been his job throughout history, is to do some work for us. So when you tell people like, no, thunder in the backyard, he's in a way worse situation, and he's not looking forward to his cousin's wedding. He doesn't have that part of his brain where he can see the future. So he's just miserable every day. Yeah. So the best thing you could do for old Thunder is go and carve him up. And that boggles people's minds. So I've continued to study philosophy. I still, I'm going to be in college for the rest of my life. And I currently go to Pennsylvania State University, and on a part-time basis, and I study narrative technology, which is an offshoot of philosophy at the Belisario School of Journalism. But anyway,
narrative technology.
Yep, which I'll explain to you in a second. But in philosophical circles, there was this. There was a guy named Springer in the 1970s who founded the animal liberation movement, and by writing a book. And basically, this is his argument: animals can think and feel, and therefore we should not eat them. Okay. So, in reality, that philosophically, that doesn't hold up very well, because the premise doesn't match. Animals can think and feel. Okay. Well, then we need to pay a lot of attention to how they think and feel. What they feel, we need to pay a lot of attention to that. So as part of the process, and he will admit this today, as part of the process of taking care of livestock is, a cow on the Alexander place, when she is past her productive point, and let's say she breaks a leg or gets a boo-boo or some kind of thing like that, the best thing to do for her is not to just keep her alive. The best thing to do is go and turn her into money, so then Brian Alexander could go and make other animals happy.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the point. And without that cow turning into money, at some point, Brian Alexander will not be able to continue to make happy steers. So it's a process to make animals happy. And so the narrative technology, I'll get to that that it's kind of outside of this, but but I'll get to it. So that's where the argument came from. That's my background in it, is through philosophy. And since I have been on social media, I am the vegan warrior, because the arguments are pretty simple to take apart, which basically comes down to, if you really care about animals, make animals happy. And if you think that making animals happy is treating everything like a puppy dog, you're absolutely mistaken. And if you don't believe me, go look at the state of most puppy dogs in the world. There's a reason that we have the Humane Society. There's a reason that we have stray dogs running all over the countryside. All he said, human beings are not good at doing things without a profit motive. We're not good at it. So, so yesterday, me and another guy, we were going to debate a vegan online we were going to go to TikTok Live. And the big question is, like, why would you eat a pig when you would not eat a dog? Okay, well, they came from the same place. They've lived in the house with human beings up until 150 years ago. They lived right in the house. Right. Pigs got along with everybody, and they were companion animals. And in some cultures, the dog, he was there to be eaten just like the hog in our European tradition, just like the hog. Everybody's there to get eaten someday. And
Yeah.
they're easy to get along with up until that point, and they make your life better up until that point. And that's the simple part of it. The other problem that I have with veganism is we're talking about, now I'm getting into narrative technology. So I'll explain what narrative technology is. Narrative technology is a pretty new term. I think that I've had a hand in defining it. But when you tell a story works a certain way. It's called the story circle. And I should have this up in front of me, but boy meets girl, or there's a guy and he's in his kingdom, and then he's called to an adventure, and he goes on this adventure, and then he has some setbacks and this kind of thing. And then he comes back from this adventure and he wins the girl because he is now a knight that's been, and he goes and he slays the bad guy that was causing bad problems when he was just some normal serf, and now he's back and he's a tough guy and he gets a girl and they live happily ever after. Our brains work that way. We want that story to work that way. We are set up that way.
We want that 4-act story with conflict and resolution and a happy ending.
Yep. So let's call it Once Upon a Time. Once upon a time, it's actually, so when we're calling this technology, it's a thing that gets a response. So when we say once upon a time, we can open the book of Genesis with once upon a time. Okay. Just like, so religion, all religions have a narrative aspect to them. And they are a technology by which we order ourselves. Okay.
Okay.
Now there's you can read about this forever and ever and ever and never read all of it. But that veganism is following that same narrative path. But every single step of the way, they have to forget, they're logically wrong. There's something they have to completely forget about for their narrative to continue down the path. And it's pretty easy to disrupt that. My problem with the philosophy of veganism is it is based on lies. You have to have a lie. You got to take that 10% of truth and turn it into a lie. And when you do that in the name of religion, so that pisses me off online, I'll yell at you. But when you turn that into a religion and you try and turn that into action, then that's why people like me shoot people like that. And
they can't reach some of the conclusions that they have unless they ignore part of the data set or just completely ignore some facts. The thing that bothers me most about vegans. Okay, so let's do a black and white extreme example. We all convert to veganism, regardless of what lifestyle changes that's going to make to you and I as beef guys and cattlemen. So everybody goes to eat veganism. So everybody goes to eat vegan food. How are we going to grow that? How are we going to grow all that corn? How are we going to grow all that soy? Where are we going to grow all that soy? Where are we going to get the chemicals to grow all that soy? What's that going to leave the land looking like? Okay. So something else that social media is getting out there is some of the effects that farmers have on the land. And hopefully the other 4 people that are listening aren't about ready to click us off, but there's one I saw, it was back in the middle of June, and it was a guy running a swather. Okay. This is the kind of the context. And so then a series of pictures flashed up about the kinds of rocks that he'd find in the field, but they weren't rocks. They're pictures of different wildlife. Like it was a turtle and he called one a slow rock. There was, a baby fawn. There was a skunk they called a stinky rock. There was an armadillo, and there's badgers. There's all these other small, mammals. And there was even a deer in there. And I thought, the whole context is like, he was kind of joking that this is the stuff that he runs over and goes through the swather when he's making hay bales.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, man, that's a sick fucking thing to make a joke out of.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to sit there and tell me you're environmentally responsible when you watch these animals go through your machine. And then you're going to post about it on social media. That's cool. That's cool. That really helps our argument. That really helps us look like we're good people, like we're doing good things for the environment. Like, you know, care for all life, respect all life. If I see a freaking 6-inch long snake sunning himself on the road in the morning, I slow down and I go drive in the ditch.
Yeah.
I mean, I brake for turtles. If I'm going down a county road and there's a turtle in the middle of the road, I will put on my hazard flashers and pull over and try to get that turtle to the side of the road that it wanted to be on.
Yep.
But we're going to go out and we're not going to give a crap when we're cutting our wheat and our corn about the wildlife we run over. We don't think about how many insects we're going to kill when we load up with that insecticide and go spray our cornfield. Oh, well, it's just the grasshoppers. Got to kill the grasshoppers. Grasshoppers eat the corn. Well, what eats grasshoppers? Birds. What eats birds? There's food chain. I think there's food chain collapses that have happened that we haven't noticed, that we just simply haven't noticed, that we're just ignorant to because we're stupid humans.
Yep. So what you're saying is that swather is death and destruction going up and down the countryside, just like a combine and just like any other apparatus, plow, disc, whatever. And that's a vegan argument. But so here's how vegans argue against that. Yeah, well, you do the same. So yes, you kill all kinds of mice and voles and all kinds of stuff by growing the lentils that I want to eat. Okay. Well, guess what? You do the same thing when you feed cows. Okay, because your swather's doing the same thing. So that's the argument. But so around this place,
and then they start pulling out those fake numbers. Well, animal agriculture takes this much more land than plant agriculture. We can grow this much protein on this much area with plant agriculture, and animal agriculture is so much less efficient. Like, those are all bullshit numbers that are all made up.
Okay. For the ranchers listening, I'm going to say the most important thing about this whole deal is we have to figure out a way to address that problem of killing people with our disc vines, hay vines, swathers, whatever. Okay. So we have to figure out how are we going to do that. Okay. On this place, my mother-in-law, she gets a couple of fawns every year. Okay. I don't know what a pound of venison costs on this place with all the trail cameras, the Polaris buggies, the cover crops. They are deer hunting crazy, and they have spent more stinking money on hunting deer and supplementing them than you can possibly imagine. And then in the first cutting of hay, we go out and they run over all. So what we're trying to
get
figure
more
out right
fawns
now,
with the frickin' mower conditioner or the haybine than the hunters would take from that area.
So we're trying to figure out right now, and I'm doing the math. Well, I asked my mother and father-in-law, I said, what do you think every fawn is worth on this place? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, how much money do you think you have tied up in hunting crap? And I seriously they have tens and tens of thousands of dollars in stuff that is designed for them to go and get turkeys and rabbits and deer, to the point where you are not allowed to do anything. You aren't even allowed to walk across this place sometimes during hunting season. I mean, they care very deeply about that. So when I said, what do you think every fawn is worth? Let's say we kill 5 a year until the end of time, and then we have interest involved and so on and so forth. By my math, every single fawn is worth at least $10,000. Just looking at it from the 50,000 foot view. So then how do we get, so that first cutting of hay, let's get rid of that first cutting of hay. Let's run the cows out on it. Okay. And which usually the first cutting of hay in this country is not worth a damn, because it gets all stemmy and seeded out before it's dry enough to go and cut. And then half the time you're spraying all kinds of sauce on it to get it to dry or, to cure. So the hay is not worth a shit for anything. And that's why I can buy it for next to nothing. And then they kill. So why can't we go and knock that first cutting down with cattle and then get second and third cutting out of it? That takes pressure off of our pastures. Cows, they might be hard on turkey eggs, but they're not near as hard as, as hay equipment. So, and they're certainly, I think that they're complementary to rabbits. and rabbit hunting around here, that's like when rabbit hunting's going on, that is the only thing that matters. And so, that's a math that as ranchers, we got to figure out, are we doing the right kind of math? And every single one of us, I don't know any ranchers where hunting is not a big component in their ranch, whether it be for family time, whether they have hunters out there hunting, for money. Hunting is a big component of it. And we need to figure out, we need to have an answer when a vegan comes and says, well, Haybines kill more fawns than anybody in the world. This guy named Chip McGregor told me, you better have a damn answer. Otherwise, you're just part of the problem. But running around saying, hey, vegans are dumb, guess what? There's as many vegans as there are farmers now. And
I think there's way more of them.
We have it's approximately the same number, but I think there are more. I think there's more because the farmers are declining and vegans. I don't know that their numbers are going to continue to increase because regenerative agriculture, small local food, the local food and foodie movement has certainly done some damage to their narrative.
I feel like there's a lot of vegans and vegetarians that have crossed back over that line once they've learned about regenerative agriculture.
Yes.
And like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of them that go vegan because they, animal welfare issue. They just, they don't think that it's humane to kill another animal, or they just think it's wrong to eat the flesh of another animal. Okay, fine. You can have that view. But let's go ahead and let's take that step back and let's look at how the vegan diet that you want to eat is made. And let's look at the environmental cost of that. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that all vegan diets have horrible environmental consequences. I'm sure there are some that don't. I'm sure there's somewhere that you can live on fruits, nuts, and berries and wild grown vegetables. I haven't seen it yet.
They don't have vegans where you can do that. They don't have vegans. We have them in America, in cities with concrete.
Yeah, there's no developing civilization or no civilization developed on a vegan or vegetarian diet, period. Like there is not a successful civilization in history that has had a vegetarian or a vegan diet, period.
The Indians, the Janus would disagree with that. In India, the Janus would probably disagree with. It's not vegan, but would be.
And who are they?
Well, they're one of the probably religious foundations of Western religion, and certainly to your point, there are some places, if you have that argument, some vegans would come and say, well, what about the Janus? And what about, there's a whole lot of Indians, there's a whole sect of India that doesn't eat meat. Now they're not vegan by any means.
Tell me what they've accomplished as a civilization. Like, what great works have they built? What great exploration have they undertaken? Have they done anything notable as a civilization, or are they just simply existing? I mean, they didn't develop through the centuries. They didn't come from the last ice age as vegans, like or vegetarians. There was a point where they decided to quit eating meat. After we've developed its civilization and writing and tools and intelligence, there's a point where people are just like, hey, you know what? This delicious red crap that we've been eating for the last, 10,000 years, that's everywhere around us. I'm just going to stop eating that now. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think so. I think that a better, because the vegetarian from India is going to have a better next century than the average American will. So your argument may fall on some hard times here soon. Here is the argument that I think is better suited for us. It has taken thousands of years for them to get to that point, and the state of animal welfare in India is absolutely flipping atrocious. Okay, cows walking down the road, cows left to starve. They remove the profit motive from animal husbandry, so they still milk cows there. But when you're done with your cow, you just turn it out because or you get someone to smuggle it across to Pakistan, so where it's legal to eat it. But the cattle, living in garbage, all this kind of stuff. In India, that model, the outcomes that India has for livestock have been absolutely atrocious, horrifying. That's what veganism gets you, because one of the Corriente cows on the Alexandria place, if she goes and she gets something wrong with her that causes her to not have a calf, and Brian can't go and take her to town and turn her into something, she's gonna, the Red Hills of Kansas is not a fantastic place to go and die of malnutrition. So so the profit motive needs to be there, and India is a prime example of why a profit motive needs to be there. I think that's probably a better argument for the cattlemen. But at the same time, that comes down to, let's go find a dead pile at a feedlot.
Yeah.
Let's go get that in the background behind us when we're talking about all the benefits of eating meat. No one wants to do that.
And we've got an image problem of feedlots. Like, not just an image problem. Feedlots are a problem. I mean, they're a problem from an animal welfare and animal husbandry point of view,
environmental point of view,
an environmental point of view. I mean, they're bad.
Yep.
But for as much talking about the subject as I've done, I don't see a way to not have them at scale. I mean, again, we're back to a scale problem. Like, trying to manage at scale, trying to feed people at scale. There's a part of me that wants to just say we should stop worrying about scale. Stop worrying about trying to feed the world. Don't worry about feeding the world. Feed yourself. Feed your neighbor. Feed the community down the road. And let's do that. Let's feed ourselves and let's feed our communities, and not worry about feeding the world. Because in the whole feeding the world mentality that we've seen the shift to, I mean, you're a few years younger than I am. I kind of get that sense, like late 30s, 44.
Me too.
Huh. Okay. So I guess we're
clean living, Brian. Clean living.
Yeah. So we've seen the same things. I mean, we were kids during the Reagan area, and we've watched all this consolidation. We've watched all our manufacturing get moved overseas. We've watched, these meat packers consolidate, build bigger and bigger plants, bigger and bigger feedlots. We've watched all the oil companies. We've watched the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, we've watched all these mergers and these companies where we used to have some choice in tractors. You used to have, you used to be able to get an Alice, a Massey, a John Deere. You used to be able to get every color. Now you're lucky if your town has 2 different colors of tractors in it.
Yep.
So we've seen all this consolidation. We've seen another rural exodus back to the urban areas. We went through this really weird period where you had to have a college degree. If you don't have a college degree, you'll never get a job. Nobody will ever hire you. And the only way to get ahead in life is to go to college, which now we don't have a generation of tradesmen. We have a half a generation of people that are overeducated with a degree they can't pay for in a job field that's overstaffed. Like, we've been listening to these lies, and now they're kind of all being laid bare. The veganism argument, you're doing a great job of debunking it. We can talk about industrialized ag, and yeah, we got this way because efficiencies of scale, but the thing that efficiencies of scale ignore is the welfare of the individual. Whether we're talking about the welfare of the individual person or the individual animal.
Yep.
Those are being ignored in the bigger society. And we're people, we can generally kind of take care of ourselves, but animals can't do that. We have to be there to take care of them. And we build these, we build these, 10,000 head chicken barns, 6,000 head hog barns, 75,000 head feedlots. That a 5,000 head hog facility produces the same waste as 15,000 people per day.
Yep.
Oh, we'll just manage that in the lagoon. But if it's municipal waste coming out of people's houses, oh God, we got to have all kinds of rules for that. There's a point where agriculture where we have to be good neighbors. There's a point where we have to square the feeding the world with taking care of our community. And I'm not sure how all that fits together.
Well, I think the answer is, I don't know of any ag economists that have stepped up to the forefront and kind of looked at these economies of scale and looked at a lot of these problems. If anyone's listening to this and they're an economist, or they know an economist that knows anything about agriculture, get them in touch with Brian, because that's one of the components that we're missing. Is we can't explain a lot of this stuff. We can't, because I'm not an economist. I'm a writer. Is probably my major education. And Brian's a sailor, so he just drinks beer and carouses and punches his friends. So that's what we need, is the economic component, is someone to take this, is to lay this out so we can go and sift through the problems. For instance, the economics of Walmart. Okay, Walmart's fantastic. It's a wonder of the world. You can go there and you can buy protein for $1 a pound. You can buy eggs for 10 cents a piece. It's a wonder of the world. It is a wonder of the world because we are subsidizing the Walton family by giving all of their employees welfare.
Yep.
Okay, plain and simple. You want Walmart to have junk on the shelves when you go in there, it's because of the people that you complain about on welfare. Okay, pretty simple. We give them a welfare check, therefore they can afford to work at Walmart. And Walmart can and then they can go and take control of things, and they can get 10-cent eggs, and they can, do all that kind of stuff.
Just so we don't get sued, it's not just Walmart, like Dollar General, Family Dollar, like the model
Walmart
replicates.
Walmart, come sue me. I'm trying to sell beef here. I'd love to get a couple of news stories going to Walmart trying to sink money down. You guys ought to see how I can write a paper. So yeah, come sue me, you bunch of hillbillies. But anyway, that's across. You get to a certain scale in agriculture, and that's also the case because we're propping them up with our government tax dollars. I'm not saying we need to go and cut that off tomorrow. Chip becomes dictator and says, "Hey, let's cut off government tax dollars," and a tractor doesn't make it out in the field next spring, because that would cause a lot of big problems. But we need to be able to make noise and get the things changed in the direction that they need to change, because eventually Bill Gates is going to show up with his driverless tractors and run those guys out of business. Everybody's going to change. There's one thing I guarantee you is going to happen. Chip McGregor, you have the Chip McGregor guarantee. Shit's going to change.
Oh yeah.
And it's going to change for you. And if you think that everything is going to stay the same in your operation, whether you're a big time farmer and you're running, bazillion dollars worth of equipment, shit's going to change.
I'll be fine. I'll be fine, Chip. I've been farming this way for 50 years. This is how Dad did it. This is how Grandpa did it. This is how we've always done it. It'll be fine. This will all work. Everything's fine.
Yep. And great grandpa built a big, beautiful house out on the prairie, and you're living in a trailer house.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think that things are going that way. And here's the other thing, and this is why I'd like to get an economist involved, is eventually when someone's making money and they get to a level of efficiency, I know this much about it, economics. They get to a level of efficiency where they can't improve efficiency anymore, so they just stop delivering as much stuff. Okay, so right now, go to Walmart, see what's on the shelves. They're still making as much profit. Okay, but can you, I looked all over hell for a bone-in sirloin, a choice bone-in sirloin steak that I wanted to compare. I want to do a side-by-side comparison with one of my steaks, and I could not find one of the damn things. In 3 towns, I had to go to my local butcher and go and which, I should have just started there anyway, but I wanted a straw man. I wanted one of their select, I wanted one of their critters that should have been USDA select, and they're calling it choice. But no, I had to go and actually get a choice ribeye to compare with, which is unfortunate. But I think we'll stand up all right. So so now they just stopped delivering. Now we're at the stop delivering checkpoint of the economic cycle.
Well, and that almost wants to open up a whole different conversation into transportation and logistics and supply chains. And
well,
It's hard to talk about
I
supply
can do all my
chains.
logistics. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's hard to talk about supply chains and logistics right now because everything, it seems like everything is just breaking down. Like all the supply chains are breaking.
And I know that this, I don't think that this is visible to anybody. I'm sitting in my freezer room. I have a bunch of 22 cubic foot freezers. I have a stand-up glass door freezer behind me that will, after it gets serviced today, it'll be a display. I can do every bit of logistics on this place from womb to plate. I can do that with my 3/4 ton pickup myself. Well, and chances are really good that my wife can do it better than I can. But the logistically, now we're buying hay. And we are gonna try and see how far we can get on corn stalks this winter and see how little hay we can get by with. But we can do everything on this place with a 3/4 ton pickup. And the reason being, I've had a CDL my whole life. But since I was 19 years old, I've had a CDL. I came out of the military and my hazmat, I allowed it to lapse while I was in the military. I went to take my hazmat and they're like, it's going to be the test weight this long. I was like, screw it. I'm not pulling tankers right now anyway. I went back, then someone said, hey, you want to come haul some gasoline? I was like, heck yeah. Went to get my hazmat and get all my guys in hazmat and all that kind of stuff. And you had to go and get a background check to do hazmat. That's pretty easy for someone that's been running around his whole life with a top secret security clearance with a bunch of pretty fancy caveats on it. And I ended the process was so painful, I didn't do it. I said, guess what? I like dispatching better anyway. I really don't want to go haul gasoline around. But to get my guys tankers and their hazmat endorsements was really, really painful. And then when I play trucking business, one of my things is I help guys get their CDL. To get your CDL now, so to get a hazmat endorsement, you got to go through all kinds of things to get a background check.
Right.
And now you got to go to college to get your CDL. Guess what? We already had a shortage of truck drivers. The problem is going to be driving trucks sucks. Anybody that's ever driven truck, there are people that are like, you know what? I just love driving truck. Like, fantastic. There's something wrong with you. That's absolutely to be away from your family for extended periods of time and suffer along. I know there's people who are good at it. Don't send me hate mail. Send it to Brian. But that it's not a fun job. It's called work for a reason. They get paid good money for a reason. And now we're making it more difficult to do that. And we're talking about, the theys. I'll tell you who the theys are in this. The theys are Pete Buttigieg, Indiana boy, who runs the Department of Transportation. And I am absolutely positively convinced that they would like to replace the truck driver with autonomous vehicles. And by they, I mean Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, yeah.
And the tech sector, Silicon Valley and Pete Buttigieg would very like to replace truck drivers with a autonomous version.
Of course, they would love to have the government come in and say by 2035, all trucks on the road will be autonomous.
Yep. And that's
going to be good for battery manufacturers and electric truck manufacturers. And
the only thing that's stopping autonomous trucks right now is people not being comfortable with it. So, the lady in the minivan, like, oh, I don't know if I want to have a computer driving next to me, like she's doing a better job, which she probably isn't. But when she runs out of macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, she'll be all for it. So that's the day. And I think that's the direction that is going. And we're going to have some hard times between now and then.
Yeah. So we gotta kind of head towards wrapping up because I got to get to work before it gets over 100 and go look at some stuff. You're talking about wanting to get an economist on. I'd love to find the right one, but it's got to kind of be the right one. And the reason I say that, I don't think that, okay, let me back up. I don't feel that the Democrats, the Republicans, or even the Libertarians, or anybody else I've ever heard for that matter, has a good enough understanding of the economics of labor and food production.
Yeah.
I don't think that there is a political system or an economic system that adequately addresses the labor and the energy inputs and economics of food production.
Well, and I think you have to pick a side. And this is, like we're talking about the jungle up in Sinclair. that's from my education in literature. You have to pick a side. So I took a class on labor and literature, and there are people that have doctor's degrees in literature, and they specialize in talking about unions and stuff. They're out there. So you have to pick a side. If you want an education, you got to pick a side at some point. And I don't know enough about it. It's Keynesian, labor versus capital, that kind of thing. So I just I'd like to find someone, I'd like to explain to someone that I have these autonomous mechanisms that go and take forage and turn it into delicious steak, and they do it, all on their own, and I only need to see them every so often. I'd like to talk to an economist about that. So someone knows someone. It's out there. That's a component we're missing, though.
Well, hopefully somebody will write in. All right.
Yeah.
We're heading out of here. So did I forget anything?
Nope.
Anything?
Nope. Grass.
Any other axe to grind? Anything else you want to get off your chest?
Nope. You guys get in the grass-fed beef business. The demand is, you got to sell it. You got to go and talk to people. There's a downside to it. You got to go talk to people. But everybody, if you have replacement heifers that you're going to keep, don't give them any shots. Don't give them any antibiotics. Make them go and do it on their own. Keep them on grass.
Treat that heifer just like the cow that you wish she was.
And then out of those replacement heifers, keep a couple extras, and the ones that don't breed, turn them into grass-fed beef. If you don't have the desire to go and get butcher dates and all that kind of stuff, go find someone like myself that wants to buy them. Okay, and we'll figure the rest out. Everybody needs to start transitioning into some type of more sustainable production model, because the people that we're selling beef to, they stopped breeding a long time ago, and their numbers are going down.
Yeah. I think that's good advice for everybody in livestock or in agriculture, period. Start looking at different ways to do it and know who your customer is and know how you should be serving your customer, because things are changing. And I think we're about ready our society, our country, we're very close to entering a period of change that will be so rapid, it'll make your head spin.
Yep. We're heading into the 1920s and 1930s right now.
All right. Where can people find you on social media to send you hate
They
mail?
can find me at Vegan Warrior 2 on TikTok. What else? I have a website. I can't remember the name of the website. BlueCreekFarmBeef.com.
Blue Creek Farm.
Yep.
Beef.com.
And that is, if you live way on the other side of the country, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to have you on the newsletter. I don't know how excited I am about shipping stuff across the country. If you are in Cincinnati, Louisville, or in the surrounding, or Indianapolis, and you're in the surrounding states, we would love to be part of community with you and get you in touch with someone that can help feed you and your family.
Great stuff.
Good stuff. Thanks, man. I'm honored to be on. I feel like people are going to watch this and you're like, we went from Fred Provenza to this dipshit.
I won't tell you how I feel most of the time when I'm talking to some of my guests. I'm like, people tune in to keep listening to me, or they here for the guest. I can never be sure.
Well, thanks for having me on. It was an honor.
Well, thanks for doing this, Chip, and have a great day, buddy.
You too. See ya.
Have a great week.
You too.